All right. So yeah, Fernando, the stage is all yours now.
Thank you so much. You need to tell me if you're going to be able to see my screen or not. Let me see here. Can't share your screen. That's great. Of course I can't. Just a second, guys. Of course this would happen.
Yeah, no worries. Just take your time.
I think I'm going to need to reopen the app. Let me see if it's going to work.
Yeah, I think he didn't have the permissions to share the screen on his Mac.
All right, I am back. And I believe I can present now.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
All right, cool. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sid, for inviting me back here. Talking about Amplify is one of my favorite things nowadays. It's even though I cover Amplify, I also cover a lot of other services that AWS consider that are under what they call front-end and mobile technologies. That is Amplify, AppSync, Device Farm, and also now the newly released, still in preview, Amazon Location Service. So yeah, it's great to be able to spread the knowledge of a little bit about what we've been doing here. I think we've been doing great things, and thank you so much for having me back. The topic today is Amplify DataStore. And the way that I can explain, I'm going to go over Amplify. I'm going to go over details of DataStore, what it does, what it doesn't do, what is it good for, why you should use it. But I'd like to start by thinking that most of us, or all of us, we are mobile developers or front-end developers. We've all faced situations where we needed to build applications that have a lot of real-time requirements or offline requirements. And we're always facing problems like, okay, I need to handle the state of my current application and see when is it online, when is it offline, when I'm supposed to send the data to the backend, when I'm supposed to sync the data with the backend, right? What if I have 5 people trying to push data to the backend at the same time? So if you ever had to face any type of situation like this, which is very, very common, Amplify DataStore is a very good option for you. A little bit about myself. I am a specialist solution architect focusing on mobile and front-end technologies, as I mentioned before. I've been in AWS for 1 year and 6 months now, but I've been working with mobile technology since I was a kid. Even before college, I was already building mobile applications. I built mobile applications in Java, Symbian. When iOS came along, I was right there to start playing with it in 2009, 2010. Android, I've built applications in multiple cross-platform frameworks that are out there. Can name them all because we don't have enough time to name them all here. But I've been a little bit involved with the Flutter team on Amplify because I think it's really interesting what they're doing there and this type of marketing, the market that they are targeting. Flutter is growing more and more and more. Honestly, I've always been a little skeptical about cross-platform development because I don't know if you have, but I suffered a lot in the past with cross-platform development. So when I see something like Flutter coming along, I start to become really curious because it feels like it is working. It feels like it is different. So I'm really interested to learn more. I wouldn't even call myself a Flutter developer. yet, because I'm learning a lot as I go. But my goal here is not to go over Flutter with you, it's to go over the Amplify DataStore library for Flutter. So to start, let's think about Amplify first. What is Amplify? The way that I like to talk about Amplify, I like to break it down into three pieces, right? The first piece we have is the provisioning piece. As I mentioned before, we're all front-end developers here, right? Probably not all of us are back-end developers. If you find a very good front-end and back-end developer, I'm not talking like full-stack developers. No, I'm talking about really, really good back-end developers who know how to handle reliability, high availability, security, everything that is involved in building a very strong backend that can support millions of people from all around the world, right? That is rare. Okay, everybody can build a front end. Everybody can build an API that connects to a NoSQL database or a SQL database, whatever you want to connect it to, right? That is fairly easy. That has been done multiple times. The problem is, can you do this correctly? Can you do this in a way that scales? Can you do this in a public cloud in a way that it is secure, right? Those are the differences that we try to fix with the provisioning piece of Amplify. Amplify was built for front-end developers who don't really want to care too much about the backend, right? They want to trust a tool that's going to build the backend properly for them. Being using an admin UI, which you just go to the console and pick and choose which categories you want to use. Authentication, you want to create an API, you want to create storage to store pictures, you want to add some analytics features, push notifications, AR, VR, machine learning. You pick all of that, you say, okay, deploy it to my project on my front end, and there you go, right? You can do that either from the admin UI and also from my preferred method, which is the CLI. You just open the terminal, start typing Amplify init to start a project, you start adding the categories, and that generates a CloudFormation template for you. And CloudFormation template, think of it as a template for infrastructure as code. Building your infrastructure in AWS through code, which can be either JSON or YAML. But with Amplify, you don't need to care about that, okay? The Amplify CLI or the admin UI, they do all the work for you. So you just need to say, again, which categories you want to do. Just say, okay, it's going to be deployed for you, and you can connect to it directly. That brings me to the second piece, which are the client libraries, okay? And the client libraries are a way for you to connect to the backend, right? AWS, or called Amazon Web Services, for a reason. Everything that we build has an API associated to it, right? So if you build any service, you're going to have an API that you can communicate back to the system, to the backend that you have created, right? That's great. That's very flexible. That's not really user-friendly most points. That's why people start creating SDKs and libraries to wrap the API functionalities in again, in a human readable way, right? In an easier way to understand, to see what you're doing on your code there, make sure that you are doing proper processes and benefiting from what the technology that you choose to use can offer you. Amplify does that with the client libraries. We have client libraries for JavaScript, Flutter, Android, and iOS. And what these client libraries do, just create a very opinionated, easier way for you to connect to that backend. We're going to cover a little bit about that in a few slides too. The third part, we're not going to focus on that because this talk is mainly focused on mobile, not front end, but we also have the capability of hosting, right? If you've ever hosted a static website on AWS, you probably created an S3 bucket with a CloudFront in front of it, a CloudFront to connect to it, right? Amplify hosting, it takes it to the next level. You don't even have to worry about CloudFront. You don't even have to worry about S3. You just pick up a zip file with your static website or connect to a Git repository, and then you're good to go. Your static application will be hosted there. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about provisioning. once you see this, you see an animation going through here. But what I want to talk about provisioning, right? Just reinforcing what I said before. The way that we handle provisioning, again, is you pick and choose what you want to use, the categories that you want to put on your application, right? Either via the CLI or via the admin UI, okay? Templates will be generated for you automatically. You can actually see them. And then after that, you can just say Amplify push, or just pull the data that is created via the admin UI through your front end, because your backend application will be provisioned there. So just a friendlier, easier way for front-end developers who don't have a lot of back-end experience to handle these things. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the client libraries. As I mentioned before, we have a client library, okay, and we have a library for each category that we choose to use. So in this particular example, this is how we set up the dependencies on a Flutter application, okay? And this on a Flutter project. In this particular example here, we have the Amplify Flutter core lib, right? We have DataStore, the DataStore library, the DataStore category. We have an API category. There's a difference between them. And we have authentication with Cognito. This is what we're going to be using to build the app that I'm going to be demoing today, right? After you have those dependencies there, go ahead.
Fernando, so do you have to add these dependencies manually, or does your CLI take care of that?
You have to add those dependencies manually.
Okay, gotcha.
You need to add them, yeah. I'll show you later on the demo what is created automatically for you, like boilerplate code. Okay. Now the next step is you go to your main.dart file, or whatever file you are working with there that you want to use the Amplify libraries. You import all the packages that you're going to use. Okay. After that, you initialize all the plugins that you're using, plugins related to a category. In this particular one, even though we're initializing 2 plugins here, I only have one example, which is the Amplify DataStore plugin, which I'm initializing here. After you initialize all the plugins, you need to call Amplify configure. And that configuration can only be done once per application life cycle, right? So if you want to configure another backend for your application, you're going to need to restart the app. So be careful with the hot reloads and things like that, right? In some cases, it might not work. Now, after you have this configured, you start calling the APIs themselves, right? In this particular case, DataStore comes with observing capabilities, querying, saving, deleting, right? So remember, very opinionated. You know exactly what is going on there. They're easier to use than using the AWS SDK, for example, for iOS, and calling AppSync directly to play with GraphQL mutations and queries. This takes care of all of that process for you. So instead of creating a query in GraphQL, you just call query, pass your query with your predicates. That's all you need to do. Now, these are the categories we support, that Amplify supports for JavaScript, for example. For Flutter, we do not support all of them, right? If you want to know all the categories we support, please go to the documentation. For example, Amplify for Flutter does not support interactions, PubSub, XR, which is AR/VR, predictions, right? But it does support analytics, authentication, API, functions, data store. So take a look at our documentation. It's going to explain exactly what we support and what we don't support. And new things are coming, right? So every day. So always keep your eyes open for changes in what the library can provide to you. But we're here to talk about one specific category, which is DataStore. And what our documentation says about DataStore is that Amplify DataStore provides a programming model for leveraging shared and distributed data without writing additional code for offline and online scenarios, which makes working with distributed cross-user data just as simple as working with local-only data. There's a lot of words, right? But they are very well put words. That's exactly what DataStore does. If you want to build an application that is offline first, and you don't want to worry about syncing that data back and forth from the cloud, you want to let the library handle that for you, Amplify DataStore is a great choice for you. Okay, that's what it is there for. It's not simply an API where you can do gets and posts from a backend. It does much more than that. Okay. And how does it work? Okay, I have a couple of processes here to share with you. The first one is the local model. Amplify DataStore, as I mentioned briefly, you have that offline first mentality, right? You want to develop your application first so we can work offline. And then you want to make sure that you can sync that data back to the backend. So how does it work? You are a developer and you want to interact with your local storage, which can be in SQLite, for example, okay? Instead of calling those SQLite's APIs, methods, functions directly, we provide a storage API for you, where you are going to use those very opinionated methods that I mentioned before: save, query, observe, delete. The storage API is going to connect to a storage engine and a storage adapter, which are going to do a couple of things. But for offline scenario, what it's going to do, it's going to transform that amplify.datastore.save into something that SQLite can understand and save that data into your local storage for you. Same process for querying, same process for deleting, right? So very simple process going on here. And other technologies have other methods of storing data. I'm just using SQLite here as an example. Okay. Now, what if I want to sync the data to the cloud, right? That data that I have, what if I want to sync it with the cloud, right? I want to make sure that, all right, it is working offline, everything works great. I can save the data, I can delete the data. I can do crazy queries on top of my data. Perfect, everything works fine. All my unit tests are passing, everything is great, perfect. But I don't want an offline app. I have an application that has multiple users connecting to the same backend. Maybe not even with the same front end, right? Because remember, you don't need to connect the same front end to a backend. You can create a backend using Amplify and have multiple front ends connecting to it. So let's pick the Uber example. The Uber has a user application and it has a driver application. Okay, those applications could connect to the same backend. Imagine the driver application sending location information back to DynamoDB, for example, and the user, and the user application grabbing that information in real time from the same backend. That's the same process here. So if it works offline and you want to sync it with the cloud, you just want to add another category to your Amplify project, to your Flutter project that leverages SAM's Amplify, which is the API category. And the API category is going to create that backend for you, which leverages AppSync, which is our GraphQL service, and Amazon DynamoDB. One great thing about Amplify is it is extremely flexible. Even though that's the default way to handle data, to build a project, build a solution, you can also expect the same behavior with API Gateway, for example, and a Lambda function. Or instead of Amazon DynamoDB, which is one of our NoSQL database offerings, services, you can use a relational database. You can have an Oracle database, SQL database. You can have a graph database, a ledger database, time string database. You can have a database in another cloud provider. You can have a database that's sitting on a server behind your desk, right? It doesn't really matter. It only needs a way to access it. So it is flexible in this way that you can communicate to different backends, right? So the difference here is once you have that backend configured and provisioned, the same process applies. You have the storage API, which you're going to be calling DataStore save, DataStore query. Storage adapter connects to your local storage to translate that information so the local storage can understand. And the storage engine right now, it's going to connect to a new piece called sync engine. And the sync engine has two main responsibilities. Understand that there's a change in your local storage and sync that back to your backend, or understand that there's a change on your backend and sync that with your local storage. Okay, so that is provisioned out of the box for you. You don't need to worry about WebSocket connections, managing WebSocket connections. If you ever had to build that manually, you know that first of all, if you're working on a pay-as-you-go model, you need to really be smart about what you're doing there. So you're not leaving connections open, or you're not calling the backend more often than not. So that particular process is abstracted from the developer. And the developer can trust the sync engine, that the sync engine is doing its job. Okay, and the same process applies. Once the sync engine kicks in, it sends the data to Dynamo through AppSync. And that can be a query, that can be new data that we're saving, updating, or deleting. That is reflected on Amazon DynamoDB. And not getting too deep here, but all of this data is versioned on the DynamoDB side, and you will understand why when we start talking about conflict resolution. Okay. Now, the way that you get this going, right? The way that you define what you're going to have on your DynamoDB tables, the type of tables you're going to have there, and also on your local storage, is through a GraphQL schema, right? This is plain old GraphQL. If you know about it, great. It doesn't change.
Hey Fernando, your presentation got cut off. I guess you have to share again.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
There you go. Where was I? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Perfect. So the way that we generate those tables, those models on your local storage and also on the back end, right, being AppSync and DynamoDB in this particular example, is through a GraphQL schema. This is where you define the type of models, relationships, authorization, methods that you're going to have, right? And you can have very fine-grained authentication and authorization control here through using the GraphQL schema. This very simple example creates a new model called post, and the post has an ID, a title, a status, a rating, and a content. And the status is just an enum, right, that says that the post is a draft or it has been published.
This this doesn't seem like Dart though.
No, this is not Dart. This is GraphQL. This is a schema based on GraphQL. That schema, it's going to be the same for JavaScript. It's going to be the same for iOS, Android, and Flutter. Okay? Same process here. So you just need to define that. Another way that you have to define that, which is more user-friendly, is through the using the admin UI, right? Which you can go drag and drop, write the model's names and the attributes there. So it gives you an interface to make it easier, right? But if you're a little bit more hardcore, you just create your GraphQL schema, and that will help create your local storage and also your DynamoDB tables.
So you create the GraphQL within the Flutter project?
You create within the Flutter project, yes. Once you initialize the data store category, okay, it is, if you do it through the CLI, it is going to ask you, do you have an annotated GraphQL schema? And if not, it's going to give you a few options to create one, right? One simple one like this, one with relationships, so you can just start from there. And our documentation is actually pretty good in explaining to you what you can and can't do here and how to achieve what you're looking for. Again, if you're looking for a more traditional way to define your tables and relationships, go to the admin UI. Okay, it is easier to use.
Okay.
This is just for.
Yeah, my only thought was, why not just use a YAML or JSON file for GraphQL too?
Because that's what AppSync understands. AppSync
Okay.
talks GraphQL, right? That's the process that AppSync takes to create the schema, right? And the mutations, yeah.
Yeah,
that's how it works.
The only thing is the syntax difference might throw people off a little bit, but not too much though. I mean, it's just one-time configuration,
Yeah.
so it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. Just just like we learned, JSON, YAML, right? This is just GraphQL, and it can be really simple, or you can create a very complex schema, right, with a bunch of relationships, authentication models. So it is very, very flexible in this way. But again, if you want a more traditional way to configure a table, relationships, admin UI is a good option for you. And if we have enough time left, I'll just show you how that works.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, talking a little bit about mutations, right? That's what AppSync calls creating, updating, and deleting objects that are related to models, right? If you want to create a new post, for example, very easy. You just instantiate a new post with the data that's going to be within, and then you call Amplify DataStore save. Deleting is the same process, right? But before that, you need to query to know exactly what you want to delete, unless you want to delete everything. So this we're creating a query here with a predicate that says, I want to bring in every post that has the ID equal to 123. And after that, I'm going to call Amplify DataStore delete on every element that we get. We should be only one, right? Because the ID is unique in this particular model, but we just call Amplify DataStore delete. Okay, there are a few gotchas here for updating. You cannot update directly an object, right? You need to copy that object first, which is actually a good practice, to then update it, right? But if you check our documentation, it's going to be all covered there. For queries, you call amplify datastore.query, passing the model. Oh, sorry about that. Passing the model that you're trying that you want to query. In this particular case, we just want to grab all the posts, right, from the backend or from the local storage. Actually, this is always from the local storage, right? In this particular case here, and you can add predicates to it. Okay, you can add predicates to filter the type of data that you are bringing in. Okay, because maybe you don't want to bring all the data to your local storage to query it, right? Maybe you want to bring just a subset of your data, so you can use the predicates for that. So the same process that we had here on this particular query, where we were putting a predicate for a post where the ID was equal 123. All those predicates act as an AND. So if you keep adding here a bunch of equals, it's going to be equal 1 and equal 2 and equal 3. So be aware of that. There is a way to do ORs, but the default mode is equal, and you can chain them, right? You can query equal 123 and then contains whatever string you want to catch and use multiple attributes. So it's, again, very flexible.
So Lens has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify what this allows you to basically do full text search, if I understand correctly, for any string or part string.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you have an attribute string based or number, whatever you want to, whatever attribute is, right? You can use this predicates to filter the response that you get from the backend and from the local storage.
Will it is it still a query? Query-wise, does it query partly, or does it like get all the data and filter it locally?
That's a good question, right? So the default behavior is getting all the data. The process that it takes is you actually syncs the data from your backend to your local storage. Remember, this is an offline model, right?
Okay.
So it's going to sync the backend to your local storage, and then it's going to query the data. That's the default way of doing it. If you want to just bring a subset of your data, you need to tell Amplify that, but it is possible, right?
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
How it works. You're welcome. Now we have some authentication rules here. If you want to add, and this you can do very fine-grained authentication and authorization access to your models. So you can say things like, okay, for this particular model that I have, the post model, I have an attribute called status, right? Which is going to say if it's draft or published. But I only want people that belong to the admin group to see that attribute, right? Or I just want the one person, I just want Sid to see that attribute, right? Because he owns the whole publication process. You can go and tell your model, you can configure that from the admin UI and from the CLI. You just need to change your GraphQL schema to replicate that. In this particular example, we have an auth rule here that's going to allow only the owner of the data that was created to update, delete, read the data that is there, right? And we have a few out rules. We have owner-based, which was the one that I mentioned before. We have a static group. If you have a group of people that are grouped within an entity, you can use that to allow or deny access. You can do both, owner and static group. You can make it public. Only guest users can see all the data, or you can have it private, right? Guest users will not see the data. And we have owner-based with OpenID coming up, and static group with OpenID coming up, right? Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, anything that is OpenID enabled. And we have conflict resolution. Remember before I mentioned very briefly that we are versioning all the changes that are made to your backend. And, oh, see here, sorry, yeah, I'm good. We're merging we're versioning all the changes that are made to the backend. And the reason we do that is because if you have multiple people playing with the data at the same time, you want to make sure that you have the proper rules set so you know who is going to actually save that object, right? So we have a few here. Time will not allow me to go really deep into them, but we have 3: auto merge, optimistic concurrency, and custom lambda. Optimistic concurrency basically says if you have, if you're trying to change a version of an object that is lower than the version that is within the DynamoDB or the backend itself, it's basically going to fail, so the front end needs to handle that. Auto merge, you leaving that decision to the backend based on a bunch of rules, right? So it doesn't mean that if I'm trying for my front end to change version 2 of my document, okay, but the version on the backend, it's already version 4 or 5, it doesn't mean that it's going to fail. It means that the backend is going to use a bunch of rules to handle how that's going to be saved properly. And if you're fancy and you want to build something a little bit more complex, you can also build a custom lambda to handle conflict resolution for you. Okay, that works really well if you have a good example is an inventory counting app, right? If you have a big warehouse where you need to count your inventory and you have poor internet connectivity, it is really common for many people to count the same item multiple times. And once they're all online, that needs to be merged somehow so you know what the reality really is. Last one is observing data. As I mentioned to you before, you don't need to worry about setting up WebSocket connections to detect on your front end when your back end is having a change. All you need to do is observe the data change, okay? And once you observe that data change, all the changes to your back end are going to be reflected on your front end in a way that you're going to receive a message saying, hey, there's a change here. Here is the change. And you can choose to do whatever you want with it. You can just display it, or you can call the backend again to refresh all of your data, or you can go to that specific change and just update your local data with it. Your choice. Now, let's look into how this works. Okay, I have a very, let me close the presentation here. I have a very simple demo here. It shouldn't take long to share with you. I have a to-do application. Okay, and this to-do, I have two clients here. Call it client 1 and client 2. Okay, they're both connected to the internet. So right now, what we're able to do with this application is delete, update, save, and observe changes to the database, right? To the backend. So if I add a new to-do here, let's call it meetup to-do. Thanks, Sid. And I save this, you see that that's automatically reflected on my other application because that real-time aspect is working, right? And that works both ways. If I say, okay, the bird feeder has been installed properly, I can close this, and that would be reflected here as well, right? Let's say I don't want to see this anymore and I want to delete it. It's going to be deleted. In the backend, the sync process is going to kick in. Remember the sync engine that I mentioned to you before? The sync engine is going to kick in and understand that there were changes here on my second client that I need to reflect on my first client, okay? If I remove all the internet connectivity from my phone, I can still create an application, right? I can still create a to-do. I can call it offline to-do, and I can say, I hope it syncs. Oh, not syncs, it syncs. Okay, now, since this particular client is offline, you don't see anything here on the second client, right? That's expected behavior. But if I, by any chance, come back online, the sync engine is going to kick in at that time, and it's going to reflect on every single client that is sharing that backend. Again, that's all based on that sync engine, all right? So very quick demo, you can go through the same demo here on our Amplify docs for Flutter. It will give you a step-by-step process to mimic this particular process here, and you will see all the APIs that you can use from DataStore on this example, right? And it's going to tell you exactly what to do. And good thing, not using the CLI, so you can see a little bit what the admin UI looks like. You can see the admin UI and generate the data, authentication, file storage, whatever you want from here, right? To understand how that works from the admin UI perspective. Now, jumping on the code here, because I'm almost out of time. What do we have here is the process that I shared with you before, right? I'm not going to go through it in a lot of details, but here I am adding the dependencies. Let me close this guy here. Adding the dependencies. I have my main.dart file where I am adding all the libraries, the packages that I'm going to use. You may notice that I have something here called Amplify configuration.dart, model provider, and to-do. Sid, you asked me before if these files were created automatically. Yes. Amplify creates some files automatically for you. And that was not Dart code. The schema.graphql that we created, that was not Dart code. But the code that is generated from this GraphQL schema is Dart code, right? So we have a model here called to-do, which is auto-generated. Don't mess with it, right? You can actually mess with it, but just realize that once you generate the model again, every single change you do will disappear. So I'm not that well versed with Flutter, but what we do on iOS, for example, on Swift or Objective-C. Sorry, go ahead.
Frederick, do you mind increasing the font size?
Sorry about that.
Yeah, Command plus.
There you go. Sorry about that. So what we do on iOS, if we want to add functionalities to these models here, we add extensions to it. Right? I'm pretty sure Flutter gives you a way to do something similar. I'm not sure what it is, but it's probably a way to do that. So the models are auto-generated for you. Another process that is another file that is auto-generated, it is a Dart file, which contains the AWS configuration that was created in the backend. So Amplify knows where it needs to connect to. So it has the endpoint, it has the authorization type. So if you have other types of libraries and categories added to your application, they're all going to be here. In this particular example, we have a auth category and we have an API category with DataStore. So you see GraphQL, you see Cognito here information, you see AppSync. All that information that is created automatically for you on the back end is going to be reflected here, so Amplify knows how to communicate to it. Now, going to the main.dart file, as I mentioned before, importing all the files that are related to the solution, creating here, initializing the plugins that I'm going to be using, in this case, DataStore, API, and Cognito. When we configure Amplify, we add the plugins that we have initialized, and we call Amplify configure. Remember this, Amplify cannot be configured more than once in an application lifecycle. If you have another Amplify configuration.dart here, you can call it here. It will work, but you will need to restart the application. And that's how we call the few methods that I mentioned to you before, right? We have a subscription object here that it is a representation of this observe method that we're calling. In this particular case, we're telling Amplify to observe all the changes to our to-dos, okay? And if that listener kicks in, I wanna fetch all the to-dos from my backend. And the way that I do that, I just call Amplify DataStore.query, and I want all of them. I don't need anything different, right? And then I just update my front end with the changes. Another thing we can do here is call Amplify DataStore.save. This one's updating. Remember that I mentioned that to update an object, we need to create a copy of it first and then call save. Or if you're just saving an object from scratch, you can just create the model here from scratch, the name, the description, you create a new to-do, and you call Amplify save. And the last one is delete, right? So delete is the last one, same process. So very opinionated. There's no, again, I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but this is important. We're not creating different code here to manage online and offline scenarios. We're not managing WebSocket connections. We're not doing this particular processes that are somewhat complicated to do. They are doable, of course, but let Amplify do that for you, okay? Any questions here on the code, the demo itself, anything that you wanted to see but you're not seeing? Again, if you want to go through this demo yourself, just follow this tutorial. It's going to give you the same finalized solution that I have here. Okay? Now, let's do it here. If you want to learn more about Amplify resources, here you see the documentation, you see our webpage, you see how to connect to our Discord channel so you can talk to the Amplify team about your projects, any type of solutions that you may want to discuss with them, problems that you're facing, Amplify is open source, so you can go to GitHub and open issues, request features. The Amplify team is really open to receive all your feedback, right? Because again, open source product, the more feedback they get, the better. So make sure you scan this. And then one other topic that I want you, one other piece of documentation that I want to share with you. I wrote this white paper a while back in February. It is regarding Amplify DataStore, use cases and implementation. Okay, it's not covering Flutter. It's in a more generic state. So you can see if Amplify is the right solution for you. And you can see a lot of use case and implementation strategies here for messaging and collaboration, real-time subscriptions, retail inventory counting, my favorite one, which is remote transportation tracking, application feature update, commonly known as A/B testing, right? These are all features that Amplify DataStore. These are all solutions, use cases that Amplify DataStore can help with. Okay.
Fernando, do you mind sharing that in the chat?
100%. Let me do that right now. And I'll share once I'm done the other link as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a reminder.
So last piece here, finishing up.
By the way, if you're sharing your screen, it's not being shown right now.
I'm not sharing anymore?
Yeah.
All right, I have no idea why.
Hi, Fernando. I want to ask a question.
Sure.
It's very good presentation, by the way. It's very well organized. I learned a lot. I don't know Amplify very well. I use a lot with Firebase, and I want to ask your opinion about what are some, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Firebase, but if you know something, like, can you give me a brief comparison with, like, what are the cases that better used with Amplify versus Firebase?
Yeah, well, I know Firebase really well. I worked with Firebase for a long time. I think the main difference here is the level of flexibility that, well, not only Firebase leverages Google's backends and services, right? AWS, of course, leverages AWS services by default. And I think the main difference here, that's a long conversation to have, but I think the main difference that Amplify brings to the table is the flexibility. As I mentioned to you before, AppSync here by default is connecting to DynamoDB, but it can connect to multiple databases, right? So you're not really stuck with one option here. And the process of making sure that you can connect your API to multiple databases, it is simplified by AppSync. For example, making one single query to the backend, okay, you could connect multiple databases here and grab data from DynamoDB, from SQL Server, from Oracle, from metadata from an S3 bucket, from a JSON file, I don't care. Combine all of that and send that back to the front end as one response. So that flexibility, I think, is one of the greatest points that you can have with Amplify, and also leveraging GraphQL here, which is something that the industry is learning to use more and more and more. Right? If you read about GraphQL, it's being more and more adopted. So yeah, you have that capability with Amplify too. There are other comparisons, but I think those two are the ones that I like the most.
Thank you. So if there's any applications backend data that is already saved on AWS cloud service, right? And so then so you can just use Amplify to get all the data.
Yeah, you can. That's a very, very good point. Even though Amplify helps you provision the backend from scratch, you can use a previously configured backend as a backend for your solution that is leveraging Amplify, right? So if you already have a SQL database with a lot of data, you can leverage that on an Amplify project too, right? You just need to read our documentation because it's all explained there. There are a few blog posts. And again, if you want to talk more about this, right, you can ask me more questions if you want. Just contact me. I am on the Slack channel there for the Flutter meetup, for the Vancouver Flutter meetup. You can reach me on Twitter. You can reach me on LinkedIn. If you want to discuss use cases that you have there, and you want to check personally with me if Amplify would be a good choice or not, just ping me, let me know.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, it's good. Very good presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lou. Yeah. Any other questions here? I think I'm 2 minutes over.
Fernando, sorry, one question. I noticed that Amplify API only supports Android and iOS. What are plans for Flutter Web?
Amplify API?
Yeah, at the in the pub dev, Amplify API support is only Android and iOS.
So this is what is supported today on Flutter. Okay, you can have analytics. You can create an API using GraphQL. You can create an API using REST, authentication, data store, which is what we shared, and storage, right?
But again, Flutter plugin is support for Flutter Web. I don't see it there in the pub dev.
Yeah,
I'm curious about it.
I shared the link, Fernando, in the chat.
Okay.
I think, yeah. So there, if you see the supported platforms are Android and iOS, because these days Flutter developers easily, open up their web executable too, and they expect it to run seamlessly, like it runs on Android and iOS. So I think
it should work for web too. I haven't tested it, but that's something that maybe we can test here if it works. But I believe it should work for web too. I don't know how long this will take. My computer is a little slow, but it should work for web as well.
Yeah, the package, just whoever makes the package need to update the package. And I forgot another question. It's just on the recent Flutter update. I remember somewhere I read the survey. It mentioned where a survey about what backend service people are using. It seems like the majority are still using Firebase. And and what's the reason? Is it because Amplify is newer?
That is one of the reasons for sure, right? Firebase, I believe, I don't know when it was released, but I've used Firebase for the first time in 2016, right? So Amplify, the first version, if I'm not mistaken, came out in 2018, and it has evolved quite a lot. So one of the reasons, yes, of course, it is the longevity of Firebase over Amplify, 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let's see. Something's coming up here. If it doesn't work right now, I can try to get an answer for you and come back with this. I don't know, because I haven't built this for web, so I'm not sure. We may have to do a few things here and there, but I'm not sure. Let me get back to you with this answer, okay?
Thank you.
The web platform.
Fernando, I wanted to ask about billing. So I use Firebase just because I didn't know how to do anything else at the time. And when my app loads, I've got tags and categories and all the items all load. And it's starting to get up to a few hundred and sometimes 1,000 items. And every time I load, it all pulls it from Firebase on the online, even though most of that technically would have been in the offline. So it runs a billing cycle for that every time. And I'm finding that's probably going to get quite expensive. How is Amplify billed?
The pricing process. So Amplify is free. Amplify itself is free. You pay for the underlying services that you are using, right? So if you want, we can even go through a pricing exercise to see how much your solution would cost on Amplify. Just ping me offline, and then I can help you with that. Yeah. What I can tell you from experiences, I have created a lot of pricing plans and pricing exercises with customers that are using Amplify, and the solutions that they are building rarely come out of the free tier, right? I'm not saying that's going to be your case, but that's not unusual, right? So pricing, Amplify free, the underlying services, DynamoDB, AppSync, you pay for them, right? So we really need to go service by service to understand what you're going to be using and how much you're going to be paying for it.
So technically, if you were running Amplify on your own server, Amplify like with your own, instead of using Dynamo, you were just using a server on your own server at your place, then the whole service doesn't cost anything. But so if you're running the Dynamo or some other SQL or something like that, that's really where my cost is.
Yeah, you still need a way to connect to that database that you have on premises, for example, either with GraphQL or Lambda, whatever you want to use it, right? And that price will be reflected on your billing for sure.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Okay. Unless you are using an API that you create that's also on premises, so it starts to lose a little bit of the need for Amplify in this case, right? Because you're not really benefiting from all of the features here if you don't use some of our services. But yeah.
No, that's fine. The biggest issue that I was noticing was just the amount of time that, well, this two was the cost seemed like it was going to start to explode. And the second one was just the amount of time it takes to load my app is increasing, strictly because it's going, okay, I'm going to go talk to Firebase, and now I get all the information back, and then I'm going to load everything. I'm like, well, it's all there. All you had to do is check the offline. So there's probably a way to do that I haven't quite figured out yet. But it's quite frustrating that like most of the information hasn't changed since the last time it loaded, but it has to go check it all online. And then there's a cost associated with that rather than what I'm seeing with yours, which actually is quite nice. That's like, oh, it's local. Just load that, and then we'll see if there's changes.
Yeah, it is local, and you can also do selective sync, right? If you don't want to grab all the subset of your data, for example, if you have multiple users that are using different portions of your data on your database, you can use selective syncs based on their groups or their level of access. Right, so it'll all depend how you build your application, but yeah, that's why we are here, right? To help you architect the solution. So if you need help, I can help you.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. No problem. All right.
Randall, I thought you had a question.
I did for a second. It was just about that, the Google APIs require cooperation from the server side to get the right ID tokens, and then they have to be placed in exactly the right place in your web page. And I'm kind of presuming that the reason web isn't listed yet for the Amplify core is because that hasn't all been worked out yet, maybe.
I am not sure, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I need to go back to the service team and ask them about that.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because that wouldn't be specific to Flutter web. It's pretty general in terms of just, can you use Amplify from the web?
Yeah, you can, right? We support React, Angular, React Native. We support a bunch of platforms that are web oriented.
And it's probably just in order to have web show up on pub dev, you actually have to add something to your pub spec that says this supports that.
Okay.
And so probably whoever's doing the pub spec for the pub package hasn't added the right annotations to say, yes, we've tested it with web. It doesn't require any code change at all here. That may be what has to happen.
Yeah, this particular example, I'm not sure if we're missing something. We probably are, but I'm going to need to get back to you on that to see where the support for web is.
Cool.
I'll just ping you offline.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Any other questions? Good. All right. So I think Sid's going to come back in 2 minutes, but it was a pleasure sharing all of this with you. If you have any other questions related to AWS in general, because before I was a mobile expert, I was a generalist, so I know a little bit about everything on AWS. So if you have any questions related to that, or how to architect a proper backend for a mobile front end, or any other question about other AWS services, just Twitter, LinkedIn, or the Slack channel there. I usually follow up really quick. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure. I'm going to drop some links here.
Yeah. Can you drop your handle as well? I'll follow you on Twitter.
Sure. Honestly, my Twitter is more about ranting about Brazilian government, but I usually post a few things here and there about few things here and there about other stuff. Yeah.
And you said you're on the Slack as well, correct?
I am on Slack there. I'm on Slack. Not at this moment because I had to close everything, so I didn't get any notifications, but I am on Slack, yes.
For sure. No, I was just checking. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. I think one good resource, I think that resource that I shared with you has a lot of deep links to other things. But as I mentioned before, it is an open source product, so a lot of information you get from, a lot of good information you get from GitHub itself. And so take a look there. I'll share with you here. Amplify Flutter.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I think we covered everything. I'm just putting some links here.
Okay, so thank you, Fernando. Thank you so much for
thank you so much, Sid.
Yeah, taking time and giving presentation. I know it's a lot of work, and yeah, and also the slides were really good.
It's really fun.
Yeah,
don't worry about it.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the differences between provider versus Riverpod. So this is not a deep dive into provider or Riverpod. We'll just talk about what are the shortcomings of provider and why Riverpod was created. And then we'll just have a discussion over should we switch over to Riverpod. And let me share my screen. Okay, that's great. So let's. I did do a little bit of experimentation, so I think it'll be good to show you from start, like how provider works and what are its shortcomings. So let's create a new project. Selecting the, this is where I create all my apps. Okay, so it's creating the project, and then we'll kind of create a provider and then use the multi-provider and see a few other examples. So this is a very typical counter examples. Let's extract whatever we have, counter and all the other stuff into the provider. And of course, before that, we have to depend on provider. So let's just depend on. Let me know if you have any other questions when I'm doing this, so that I can just so that you're on the same page.
We're gonna look at both provider and Riverpod.
Yeah, we're gonna do both provider and Riverpod. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Hey, can you make the text slightly bigger?
Oh, yeah.
Slightly. It's kind of okay now, but yeah, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Luke. So we counter provider, change modifier, and we do counter 0. And then, I already kind of copied the code. So what do I do? Yeah, we'll just do it. And then we have for example, I love copy pasting, and I wanted to logs all the changes from my cache. So yeah, this is a typical provider, right? And then let's try to use it within our counter example. So for now, I'm just going to use multi-provider because I want to show you some more examples. Widgets. Multi-provider. And then multi-provider. Not doing something correct. So. Oh yeah, of course. Gotta give change notifier provider, then create context. So this is a very classic provider example, right? Like you're creating a provider and then using multi-provider to provide the state to your widget tree, and then you can say here context dot watch provider off. Let's do provider off because I wanted to show you the problem with type system. Dot counter, and then same thing. And you don't have to listen to it. This is a typical example, and I want to do a couple more things. Also provide because I want to show the type system, but we can only use one type of provider, and it's going to return the nearest one.
哇，好漂亮的房子！你现在盖得越来越棒了，你的房子盖得越来越漂亮了。哇！
Okay, so any questions so far on what we're doing? So
No.
yeah, let's yeah, go ahead.
No questions so far. I have some silly questions later, but not yet.
Okay. Let's try to run this. So I think there are 4 issues with provider so far. The first one is the runtime issue. For example, you can say provider of type, and you can use it anywhere, but it's not going to tell you, hey, provider of type in does not exist, and you're going to see an error during runtime. The second issue is you can use provider of only one type. Like if you use 2 providers, but you're providing the same type, it's only going to return the provider that is closest to the tree, where you are in the widget tree. And the third issue is messy change notifier, messy dependency issue, because then you have to use change notifier proxy provider. And a lot of people don't like the syntax that it provides. So I think those are 3 issues we covered so far. Yeah, as you can see, it's going to work. It's a simple provider example, and the first issue is you can see also provider versus Riverpod, and if you look at the code, we said provider of type string, and the closest one is also provider versus Riverpod. And if you kind of change the way the ordering of the providers, then it's going to return provider versus Riverpod, and that's one of the main issues. Let's try to do like runtime issue, and then you could say provider of context, and then you can say int. And as you can see, there is no provider of type int, right? And then it kind of shows, hey, what are you doing? I couldn't find any such provider. And it would be nice if you see the issue during compile time rather than runtime. So that's the other issue. Well, I mean, it's not an issue. I think it's more of the way you wrote your code. If you're writing your code properly, you would never run into this issue. But it would be nice to have your compiler telling you, hey, there's something wrong here. Let's look into the dependency now. Let's say you have something like let's say you have shared graph, and then you in the shared graph as a feature. It's mocking the shared graphs and stuff.
You have to create a shared preference class.
Yeah, you see it, right?
Yeah, you say class. You just add a class.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, so let's try to depend add shared pref as a dependency on counter provider. So you would say late pref shared pref. I'm definitely doing something wrong. Yeah, it's the other way around. And then say so let's try to use provider to provide shared preferences and then also provide the same shared preference to the counter provider and see how that would look. For now, we're just saying, okay, change notified provider. Yeah, it's throwing an error because we have a constructor that's going to take shared preference instance. Any questions so far? Okay. So say graph. Say the sync modifier, and then you will want to provide this shared preference as a provider. So, and you would give shared pref, right? And then we need to provide this shared preference as a dependency to the change notified provider. And you can see I have a snippet. I'm just gonna.
Hey Sid, can you go again to the get shared preference function? Get, so this is okay. This is get future value. Okay, it's just a function to get this data.
Yeah. It's just an example.
Yeah. Okay. And so, but this will be similar, like just directly add a shared preference class, right? Create this whole class.
Create list for the whole class.
Yeah, I mean it's same as directly provide shared preference, shared pref list class. Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just I'm just mocking it. Like yeah. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, provider of provider, and you have provider of shared pref. Okay, what is it? What's the? As you can see, like when you're providing the dependencies, yeah, and the update function is something you have to do. That's what you need to do if you also want to watch the changes. Then you pass in. So this is what you do usually when you are working with change notified proxy provider, because it's going to give you an immutable value if you just use proxy provider. And even when you're using change notified proxy provider, you have to provide an update method that takes in this value from the update callback. So you have to do all those things. So these are some of the issues, as you can see with provider. One is I missed something here. Anyway, it's just the syntax. syntax issue. I'll figure it out later. So yeah, the first issue is you can only provide one type, and then when you're having dependencies, it can get really messy, especially if you have multiple dependencies. And again, if it doesn't tell you an issue happens during compile time, but rather it tells you during runtime. So yeah, any questions so far? If not, so I only wanted to show you the code just for provider, like the live code, because I wanted you to see what the issues were. But I already have the code set up for Riverpod, and I'll show you how the code for Riverpod fixes all these issues. Yeah, this is the code. And just like this. Yeah, can you see the code?
Yeah, the screen is a little blurred, but we can see.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's better.
Yeah, let's see. So yeah, thanks, Randall. Thank you, Lou. So yeah, it's the same example, right? Like you have the shared pref feature and then just an empty class. So the first example compared to where's the other? Did I close it? Let me see. Yeah, let's keep it side by side. So let's look at the provider example we have at the change notifier, right? So this is the provider change notifier example. It extends change notifier and you have a bunch of values. And whenever something changes, you say, hey, notify all my listeners. And compared to that, so you don't really have to use a state notifier here, but I wanted something that maps one-to-one with Riverpod. Yeah, even before we go there, let me show you the Riverpod PubSpec package. Also, I want to talk a couple of, so this is the Riverpod package, and this is a Flutter Riverpod, and it's an extension of the Riverpod library. And Riverpod library is independent of the Flutter framework. Like if you wanted to create a console application and you wanted to have your own dependency injection and state management just using Dart, then you can just use Riverpod. Hooks Riverpod is an extension of the Flutter Riverpod that takes in the Flutter hooks framework. And I never used Flutter hooks Riverpod, Flutter hooks, so I don't have a lot of context, but I remember Randall actually gave a talk at DC Flutter, I think. So maybe he can talk about it later on. Yeah, so he uses them a lot, so maybe he can talk about that later on once I finish my presentation. So in our example, we use Flutter Riverpod, and I already ran this command, this installation command, and it brings in all the dependencies, and you should know that it depends on quite a few other libraries like State Notifier and Riverpod. So State Notifier is an independent library, and Flutter Riverpod makes use of that. So as you can see here, this is a one-to-one mapping of the change notifier counter provider we had in the other provider example. So change notifier, oh yeah, sorry, state notifier. So state notifier has a mapping to something called a state, and the state object type you need to specify, in these brackets. Angle brackets, and then for counter, we know it's an integer, and then we say, okay, hey, when you're asking for the state of this counter object, then it just returns the integer, and then as you can see, the integer is nothing but the state. And that's pretty much what state notifier does. Do you have any question here? I might have confused you all a little bit, but if you're confused or if you have any questions regarding state notifier, just let me know and I'm happy to answer. So once you use a state notifier, and again, we have the mock get shared preferences. And this is how you define your providers. You can also create global providers when you're using just the provider package, but you cannot use the value. Like, for example, you cannot just say, okay, I'm going to use of the type message. You still have to, when you're calling when you're using provider to get the values, you still have to say provider of type. But when you're using Riverpod, you can just say, hey, watch this particular instance of provider, and that removes the issue where you can only call one type, because now you're calling the instance rather than the type. You can have multiple values of the same type, and then you can depend on them. And yeah, this is how you define your state notified provider. You pass in your state notifier object, and then you say, okay, this is the type of my state, and then you return the counter. And I also created a couple of examples where I am using state provider of type string for both the title and also the message. And how to use it? So there are three ways to use Riverpod, and I'm using consumer widget here. And then you just say, hey, my homepage extends consumer widget. And it's a one-to-one mapping replacement for stateless. But if you want to use stateful widget, you cannot. There's nothing called as consumer stateful widget. You still have to use my homepage extends stateful widget, and then you depend on something called as consumer. But for this example, we just use consumer widget. And as you can see, you call watch. It gives you a callback for when it's ready. It gives you scope reader, and you can use the watch to watch the value of the provider that you provided at the root. So at the root, you just says provider scope, and this will do all the mumbo jumbo of wiring all the global providers to your widget tree. So and then you can just call watch, and then you say title, and then you call the state. And the same thing with here, watch the message and state. And as you know, the message and title are of the same type string. So this is one of the problems that Riverpod solves over provider. And you can do the same. So to access the methods of a state notifier, you need to call context read counter dot notifier, and then you have to call increment counter. So I kind of felt the syntax wasn't consistent. For example, you're saying, okay, my instance dot state, but here you're saying counter dot notifier dot. It was kind of a little bit confusing, but not too much.
Oh, I want to mention something. So I was using provider, and then I switched to Riverpod, and I read a lot about the differences. So I'm kind of familiar with that. Regarding to this, when you press a button, this call method, it's contact.read. This is I read documentation mention about it's a better way to do that instead of still using watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's two reasons for that. One is it's easier to refactor. If you want to refactor your button out, then on your button widget you don't have this watch method, right? You can just use contact.read. Another they say is like the performance issue, where in this way you reduce the rebuild.
Yeah. So yeah, this is one-to-one mapping with provider of context listen false, because when you're updating, you don't really need to rebuild everything, and only you rebuild where you're reading the value. For example, maybe during a classic example is a checkout, right? You have your cart, but maybe you want to delete all your items in the cart. You can just say, because you don't need to. Oh, yeah, that's the wrong example.
Well, because I think what you mean is that pressing delete, if we said watch, pressing delete would rebuild, and then the new state would also rebuild. So that would be wasteful. Is that what you're going for?
So let's say you want to clear your cart, but the cart isn't present on that screen, right? But maybe it's present somewhere else. So you can just say context.read, because you don't need to rebuild your widget that you have, but you have to rebuild everywhere where you read the cart value, and the cart value updates over there. So you only use watch where you want real-time updates, and you use context.read where you just want to access the methods that update the state. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so I think here we saw that. Yeah, one more thing. Like, for example, you cannot do things like var int state, right? Like, you cannot say provider of type int anymore, right? Like, you're not going to run into runtime issues anymore. You have to specify the watch and the instance of the provider, which is counter, right? So now you're not running into any runtime issues. If you're using any provider you're not supposed to, it's gonna complain during compile time. So that's the other advantage over using provider. So let's look at the dependencies, right? And just it's changing, adding some shared graph dependency, and then we'll see how the dependency works here. As you can see here, yeah, so compared to the previous provider example, and you can see here, this is how you pass in dependencies. You say, okay, change notified proxy provider and the types, and then create, and then update, and then you have to provide the update method for notifying any changes. But here you're saying, okay, when you're defining the global state notified provider, you can depend on the provider reference and then watch the previous provider that you defined, and get the value, and then pass the dependency. So as you can see, it's much cleaner rather than using the proxy provider that we used during in the provider example. And also one more thing is, maybe you won't have the value, right? For example, shared preferences, when you use shared preferences, you won't have the value because you have to await. It's a feature, you have to await for the value. And in that case, you just say, and these providers are synchronous, so you just say unimplemented error, and then it gives you this nice callback or override where you say, hey, you initialize the shared preference, and then you say, okay, override my shared preferences provider with this value, and then you initialize your app. So this is pretty neat here, and yeah, and like, it solves the messy hierarchy of creating dependencies that we have with provider. So let's quickly run the example, and then see what's going on. Why is it building Mac OS? So I guess that's what it's been doing for a while. Yeah. So any questions so far? And we'll get it. We'll just dive into if you should switch to Riverpod, which is the main question, right? So.
And any downside or shortcomings?
Yeah, I feel there are a lot of shortcomings. I don't know why it's not working. But anyway, I think I'm not going to look into why it's not working right now. But anyway, these are some of the things, some of the issues that it's supposed to solve. And this is how it solves. You know, one is having multiple types, multiple providers of the same type, cleaner syntax, you know, compile time error handling, or compile time, you know, finding out issues like, oh yeah, this provider does not exist, etc. So yeah, so far this is how these are some of the advantages of Riverpod. And yeah, I guess we'll just dive into maybe Randall, do you have anything to add to what I've shown here?
Well, I can show you a short example. It's actually going to be something I'm going to do a screencast about pretty quick of a way I use hooks.
Oh yeah, so let's leave the hooks to the end of the session. Once we
end, so I wanted to bring that up. But there's that. Another couple of things I'd say about Riverpod and why it's, you know, different than Provider, and actually why I'm happy I didn't spend a lot of time learning Provider, so I had to unlearn it. The people sometimes complain that you have to create a global variable to stick this stuff in, and they say, well, I don't like globals, right? But essentially all class names are global. So when you're using Provider's way of identifying sort of where it's hooking up to, you're using a global, you're using a class name. And that's actually more global than a variable that's in a library file or as a class member or anything, which so you can narrow the scope down of Riverpod providers, but not providers, because they all have to be tied to that type system. And the type system is automatically global. There's no way to do that two different ways. So that's a big difference. It's also, I found, and I just practiced as practice. I did as part of my employment now. Thank God, I'm doing Flutter, and the first task I had was converting first this project. It's a fairly young project. I can't talk much more about the details of it, but I first converted it to null safe Dart. And that was fun and interesting. But then I was using Provider, and I said, I can do this a lot easier in Riverpod, especially some of the things you've already been asking about. And it took me probably about 4 or 5 days at most to do that conversion. But of course, I know Riverpod really well and Provider sort of well, so it's not that hard to convert it over. But the client is now much happier with the architecture that I have created for them. And so the Riverpod is definitely winning. And part of the things I was able to do with Riverpod easily is, you were pointing that out a moment ago, you can essentially build a network of dependencies on other providers. And so you can have where this particular future provider doesn't complete until these other 3 providers have all done their work with Riverpod, which is really, really nice. If you have like an initialization phase, you can basically make a future provider that is watching all 3 of those.
And what's that? How could you like briefly touch how you do that?
So before we dive deep into that, I quickly want to talk about if you should use Provider or Riverpod, and then we'll just switch to what Randall was talking about, the future providers. So, so the rule of thumb is, if you live in Vancouver, use Provider. And if you live in Portland, Oregon, then you use Riverpod, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's
Randall, you're in Portland.
so. But anyway, I think what I wanted to say was if you are someone who likes to live on the stable branch, I think you should use provider, just because it's of course quite stable. Like if you look at the screen I'm sharing right now. So this is Riverpod and has 54 issues. And then this is provider, it has 16 issues. And then if you look at what's going on with Riverpod, they're going to come up with some breaking changes. And
no, Remy said he's not going to do anything there anymore. It's pretty much stable now.
But this is the unifying syntax that he's going to change, right?
No, he's actually decided against that because it would actually break things.
Oh, okay.
Any change he makes, though, he's created Riverpod Fix, just like you have Dart Fix.
Okay.
And it's going to be able to fix any breaking change going forward. He's learned how to do that. And so the next release of Riverpod actually has that as a bin that you can run, which is pretty darn cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess maybe he's not going ahead with these changes, but it's new, so that's what you have to keep in mind. It's not something that tested over, like 2 or 3 years, like like provider, which everybody knows how to use it. It's for me, it's like I can wake up and even in my sleep I can work with providers. But I guess Riverpod, it has some learning curve, and one of the other issues I have is I like to be as close to my core SDK as possible. I don't want to divert away too much. And if you look at the code, you have to start extending consumer widget, and then your build signature changes. I mean, maybe for a lot of people it's not an issue, but for me it's kind of a psychological impact that you're diverting way too much away from the core syntax. It might not be an issue for a lot of other people. And of course the other thing is, provider is the official state management, kind of official, that is, it's at least in the official docs, right?
Well, all the other things, Riverpod's mentioned in the official docs. So is it GetX, even though it shouldn't be, but that's another story.
But no, I think they removed GetX though. But anyway, I'm not sure. I think a link that was shared by Lou, I think she showed that, they're going to remove the mentioning GetX from the official documentation. But but anyway, I think it comes down to, if you're a Maverick, you're going to use Riverpod. If you're somebody who's on master branch who likes to, fiddle with something new, I think Riverpod is for you. But I think I'm going to keep using provider because I honestly haven't run into any of those issues that I've shown you. I mean, I don't have like 20 or 30 dependencies. Even when they're dependent on each other, like it's a one-time thing, and I can do a separation of concern, and I don't have to look at that. If it is ugly, I don't have to look at that ugly piece of code. But I personally don't have any issues with provider, and I'm going to keep using it. And once I feel that the number of issues within Riverpod have come down, and I could get a sense of stability, then maybe I'll switch to Riverpod. So that's my take on it. So yeah. Yeah, please go ahead if anybody has any questions. And by the way, I'm going to stop presenting unless you want to see some part of the code.
Perfect, Sid. Thank you for the presentation. I just wrote in the chat, like I'm new in Flutter, so I'm not sure how many providers do you have in production, because I've always seen it for things like user, but I'm not sure if there are like more uses that are common. And they are always usually like close to the root of the tree. Are there any other users for them?
There could be many, yes. There could be several different types. I usually have a lot, and I think so. You'd say the same thing. You can have quite a few. You can have them depend on, one another. For example, an online shopping application, you have, a cart provider for the cart, maybe a stream provider for the user data, etc., right? And you can have the same if you're linking to, if the code is the same code base for the store, for example, you can have a different path for the store providers for listening to the inventory, for example. So I don't know if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it actually does. Thank you.
I use providers and when you call data from streams and futures from Firebase, for example, if you want the data, your UI to update on whenever there's a change, you can have a stream provider. Obviously, I think you know that because you mentioned the user provider at closer to the root, but you can have it listen to data in the document as well, and etc., etc.
Yeah, and also you can have multiple providers for your business logic, multiple providers for your platform, like locale provider, theme provider, as shared preference provider, which is like, or you can use Get or things like that. But yeah, I think you will end up with many multiple providers, but not more than 20, and it. At least for I guess single developer project, but even then, I personally never came across an issue so far with provider though.
Excellent, thanks.
Thanks, Jordy. Okay, so I'm actually going to stop recording the session now.
You don't want my talk yet?
Oh yeah. So please.
I was waiting for all the questions to get finished before I.
Oh, because there was a long pause. I felt like okay, nobody's.
Oh no, I was being polite. Isn't that okay?
Yeah, no. Go for it, Randall.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through something I'm going to screencast later, but I'm just going to point out it's almost entirely done with hooks. And I'll explain why hooks are interesting and useful. For example, this thing has a lot of state, but there are only stateless widgets. That's pretty fun. Let me pull up and share my screen here. Let's see what, it's got to be over here somewhere. How about present now? Present a window. Present my VSC. That way you can't see the rest of everything, but you can see this, right? Can you see the text here?
Yeah.
It's nice and big, right? Okay. So this is actually a program to celebrate my brother's retirement coming up soon.
Nice.
But one of the things that is interesting is that once you import, if you notice up here, importing Flutter hooks, there's where this comes from. It gives you interfaces like this. Where'd it go? I just did it. There, okay, hook widget. Hook widget is almost a one-for-one drop-in with stateless widget. But there's also hook state widget that is a drop-in for stateful widgets. So you can use this stuff with either, and you get some amazing cool things as a result of that. So let me come to the build. Okay, context didn't change here, and that's all. Skip all that. That's not stuff related. You'll be sure to watch the screencast when it comes out. This is actually a global here. Let's see, another hook widgets. These are all hook widgets. I actually have a shortcut called RHW that makes a Riverpod hook widget, and that's that one there. Okay, here's the first actual use of one of the hooks. So this program requires a set of stars. It's basically, I should probably show you the thing. If you go to ron.codemagic.app, you can see it running because I have it running on the web too as well. But just ron.codemagic.app. What I've got here, I need to have essentially something that persists between builds. And you would normally put that in state. But I went, now what am I going to do? I'm trying to avoid using a stateful widget. There's this thing called use memoize. Now that comes from the hooks package. And what it does is it runs this expression once, takes the output value, and makes it this value, which persists across builds. So it effectively is part of the state now, but it's a magic hidden state that you don't have to manage. So yeah, I didn't need to call init state or any of that stuff. I just simply have the value now. And if this is an expensive value, then we only call it once. Pretty nice that way. And here's a slightly more expensive thing. I'm creating a periodic stream. Oops, sorry, scroll down too much here. And it's over here. It goes all the way over here. Let's make it slightly smaller. I think it'll still be legible here. Yeah, should be. Everybody see that okay? I can't read the chat right now, so we'll just presume it's okay. Okay, so this is creating a stream. And if we hover this, you'll see, yeah, it's a stream of ints. And that's important. And then use memoize is making sure that we only run this once and it persists between builds. Okay, and then use stream takes this stream. Now this is just an ordinary stream. This isn't anything to do with provider at this point, but I did use hooks in order to create it. And then it takes this stream and turns it into a Riverpod stream. Okay, so the output value of that is an async snapshot, and that's a Riverpod thing. So that's the thing that gives us the .when call and all that stuff. You'll see that in a second. And then I also take the data that comes back from that and convert it to double over frames per second. That's just so I get a consistent ticker that is normalized to one change or one unit per second. Okay, so now I've got a layout builder, which if you look down in here, I guess, you know, there's no Riverpod hooks in there. But let's see, is there any more? Yeah, there's some down in the main part of the code coming up. So I'm just scrolling here. Star set. Oh, I guess that's all. It's the only hook widgets I actually used. So not as many as I thought. But that was the key here, to keep it as stateless. And one of the other things is the notion here that I can create the async snapshot by basically looking at the stream with a use stream, which comes from the hooks package. So hopefully that was interesting. And any questions on that? Anything you want to get more information about?
So how long did it take for you to get on board with the Flutter hooks package?
I was learning it. I consider it part of Riverpod just because it's all in the same repo ultimately, and it's all by Remy. So you know, it's all the same thing. Although I've been using different parts of it in different apps, so I don't even know if there's anything that's not Flutter hooks in this. I think this is all just Flutter hooks. Well, one way to tell is to do this. Come up here. And we comment out hooks Riverpod. Let's see what it does. Provider scope. Okay, that's from Riverpod. So had to have that in order to be able to hold this at the top. So that's what's going on.
Do you need the provider scope? Because I don't see any provider scope.
You're right. Maybe I don't even need that. Let's see here. How much can I comment this out without killing anything? Just put center. No. Hey, I guess you can do that. Same API. I don't know if it runs though. Oh yeah. I guess I don't need that at all. So this is completely done with Flutter hooks.
Yeah.
Which is sort of interesting. Yeah. So, but like I said, I still consider it part of the Riverpod because there is one thing that is interesting. I'm not really, well, so if I had a provider here, which is now going to error, but final provider, come on.
I feel like, Randall, I think it'll be awesome if you can do a session just for Riverpod and Flutter hooks.
Yeah,
if you have time. Actually, we have the next slot is in July. I don't know how that would work for you.
I don't have my calendar in front of me, so I can't answer.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, we usually do like second Tuesday and the last Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it'll be awesome to give a demo on how you did this amazing app for your brother.
Yeah. The spot too, if you have me, said.
Yeah.
Talk about the chat, building a simple chat app.
Oh yeah. So we have 2 slots, right? So we can do one for, one for you and one for Randall.
Oh, I see. I commented out something that was already in there. No wonder it didn't make any difference. Oh well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that without any state management solution, you created this amazing,
Well, now let me actually comment it out because maybe it will break the other ones. Let's see here. So hooks Riverpod. Flutter hooks. Yeah, hooks Riverpod is the one that we were questioning. I wonder how. Oh, you know what? I bet my IDE actually imported it when I typed provider. That probably happened. Yeah, because that's in provider. Yeah. Okay, that's probably why I got it in then. Okay, but and probably provider is now redlined, right? Let's see. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so need to fix it. And,
it's also a constant, so.
Yeah, but it's I'm just making a quick provider. The reason I want to do that, I wanted to go down here and show that in this build method. Where's build? It's not a build in Star Painter because it's a custom painter. But if I said, oh, here's a build method. Okay, so in this, is this how? Yeah, this is context. I know it's not a build method though, so it's indirect for a build method. But like my page here we go. So I could say now final number equals use provider count. Was it count? Let's see. Oh, yeah. And see, now this provider is watching, this use provider is watching this provider. So, and that can be a normally defined provider. And the thing is now this use provider is like using watch.
Gotcha.
So the context.watch, you would do it this way. And that's why this still has the same signature as it did when it was a stateless widget, which I like that you said, well, now that I'm converting it to consumer, I have to add the watch method. No, you don't need the watch because this is exactly the same as watch. And you would still do context
or in the evening.
Read, to get at the other ones too. But yeah, so that's all in there. Okay. All right. Well, that's
awesome.
That's me in my presentation there, my quick presentation.
I think maybe you can do a more, like a deep dive when you have time.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can schedule one. Yeah, I don't know when Lenz is going to give his talk, but as I said, we have.
I can do it anytime. I've already presented it. I'm pretty comfortable. Just need a couple. Just need to know when, so I can prep a little bit. But yeah, anytime. If you want me to is there interest? I should have asked when there were like more people on the call. But is there interest? You guys that are here, at least maybe, in seeing the chat.
Well, I mean, don't worry about it. Like, just give the presentation, we'll record it, and people will find it when they have time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've seen there are 25 views on the YouTube that I uploaded the first time, so people are interested.
Okay.
And they watch it when they have time.
Yeah.
And also you go hang around with a lot of other groups, and you can also tell them, hey, you're giving a presentation if you want crowd.
Yep.
Yeah. Fair enough. What?
Yeah.
Does that wrap up pretty much this meeting for today?
Yeah, and I'm gonna stop recording now.